In this video, what we're going to talk about is the Kinetix 6000 input connections, right? So we're going to talk about the connections, the way you can actually wire things up to actually utilize the home, to utilize the registration bits, to utilize anything you want to, and describe this, right? So we're going to talk actually about this. We're going to show the images and stuff like that to actually get you familiar with it, and we're also going to dive into the program to show you one actually working live. I actually already have one wired up. I don't have it programmed or nothing like that, but I have it wired up. So I'm going to actually show you that in this video. To keep it short and sweet, let's get straight to the point and get to talking about this. Now, first and foremost, let's handle a little, video quality issue. So if there's any video quality issues on the player itself, please click the bottom right hand corner. There'll be a gear icon. I record in 1080p and I record in 4K. So please make sure that you change your resolution. Change that resolution to the best you possibly can based upon your internet connection. So with all that said, let's go ahead and let's talk about this. So what does the connector look like, right? So the connector is pretty, this is the way the standard Rockwell connector looks like, right? So when we talk about this pinout, and I want to actually drop this down for just a second. So when we talk about the I/O pinout, this is the I/O connector pinout. When we start talking about this in this PDF, and I'm going to actually take this just like this. So the pinout is, when we talk about the pins, the IOD pin, right, which is the IOD pin up here. We're talking about this. We're going to talk about what exactly they are, right? So when you come down to it, you have each one of these. You have to understand the power behind them. You have to understand what the function behind them, what are they doing. And when you do that, you can better control your systems and better troubleshoot and better understand your systems. So when it comes down to it, I wanted to talk about the pinout, but it's not fair to actually show you the pinout without actually showing you a diagram or an actual picture of the actual pin itself, because when you think about it, these are just numbers, right? So where do the numbers land inside of the actual pin, or whether they land inside of the actual connector, right? They're all, this is the standard. What I'm showing on the screen right now is a standard protocol Rockwell pin, right? Pin set, right? So it's just basically a pin set that comes in, and you can wire anything you want to based upon that, right? There is also one on the screen right now that you can see that I already have taken apart, so you can see that this is exact inside and the way it looks, right? So there is a yellow cable that's already connected, and I have that connected really simply to do an illustration for the registration inputs we're going to be doing, and I have this wired to an actual push button. Really simple. So we're going to give an illustration on how to do that. So in the focus of what we're talking about, right? So I did actually, say that, you can wire up whatever you want to, as far as, like, say, for home inputs. Say, for instance, if you want to wire up a home input, you need to wire up. Now, here's the understanding what I want you to kind of get out of this too. There's several ways you can actually utilize the system. Now, the Kinetix 6000 does power itself, right, with a 24-volt power supply, so you can actually utilize that power supply for whatever you want to. Say, for instance, if you didn't have a power supply, you didn't have 24 volts, you can simply utilize the power supply inside the 24 volts inside of this that's going to be fed out of this connector to power your home switch, right? Now, I will say that is not the cleanest power you can possibly get. So what I prefer to do is to have an external source, like a 24-volt power supply, that I actually use, and then I'll wire it a certain way so that I get a clean power source. Especially for registration, it's really important. But if you want to talk about that really quick, because what I want to highlight here is, if you want to hook up a home switch, say, for instance, just like right here, home switch 24 volt. This would be the 24 volt plus. This would be the common right here. This would be so that 24 volt DC has a plus and a minus, right? So it basically has your power and your common. So with that being said, if you wanted to wire up a proc switch or a switch to home, something, maybe it's a limit switch, whatever the case may be, like running a servo to a limit switch and then having the limit switch home the actual servo, you would hook up the 24 volt power the common if it's used for that specific system. If it's not used, like say for instance a limit switch does not use a common, right? So you would just need the power 24 volt to one side and then the switch input coming back right here. So you would utilize, in the case of using a limit switch, you would utilize 4 and 5. In the case of using a proc switch, you would use 3, 4, and 5. Why? Because the simple fact of a proc switch needs to be powered up, where a limit switch often does not. All right, there are use cases where limit switches do, but in this, in most cases, probably 90%, you don't use that. Now, I want to talk about registration for a minute. So registration, I have this hooked up as a registration. So when I talk about registration, there's a couple different things you can do. Now we're going to utilize the input power for the sake of this actual video. We're going to utilize the input power of our actual controller. So what we're going to do is we've hooked up 13 for our registration, 24 volt, right? We've hooked up our common as well, so 12, 13, and 14. Now, what I would like to stress here is there's 2 registration inputs. Okay, so think about, there's 2 options you can use on a K6K or a Kinetix 6000 drive. 2 registrations you can use. We're utilizing the 1. So we have the common hooked up, we have the actual 24 volt registration power, and then we have their input 1 hooked up. So if you looked at it, I'm hooked on 13. I'm hooked right here, right? So I'll undo this real quick. But as far as that, I wanted to actually show, how to actually do that. So what I'm doing is I'm actually hooked to this area right here. Okay, so I want to actually at least show you that and show you how I have this system hooked up. Now, with that being said, right, so this is very, very simple on how to hook this up. This is the way the pinout is, right? This is the way the pinout is. So let's pull up a program. Okay, so we have our program, we're online, right? So if we were to actually test the system, right? So we want to know, okay, so we've got everything hooked up, we want to test it and make sure it works before we do any programming. We want to make sure that we, kind of commission the system and say, okay, well, hey, this is what we have, this is working. So far what we've done in everything we've, illustrated, it's working. So you want to understand the servo that it's attached to. Now in my trainer, what we've done, if you haven't seen this trainer, I've built it live on YouTube, so please feel free to watch all those videos if you want to. All you do is search this channel. You can see YouTube. Basically, it's the 30-day Servo project. You just type that into the search bar in this channel, you can find it. Now, with that said, though, so the servo that we're using, I have virtual servos right here, virtual axes, right? Virtual axis right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are virtuals, and then I have the virtual master. Now the live servo is a trainer servo, so I just merely called it TRN servo. Okay, so when you come up here to your tags, we're going to come up here and we're going to open our tag explorer, right? And we're going to come in and open this. We're going to come down to our trainer. We're going to find this tag, right? So every time you add a servo, it's going to show, it's going to populate a tag database, right? So it has all of the features that you're actually you could possibly use. So this right here is our actual trainer. This is what we're using, and you can see this. If I spin the wheel, you can probably see it's actually hard to spin right now because it's actually attached to. There we go. It's kind of rubbing the table. You can see it turning. So we want to find the registration. Now I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you the registration. I'm going to show you me pushing the button. So if I were using the home status, I would find the home status right here. This is the home status. This is the actual home input, right? And then you have event status if you want to. There's an ARM function that you can use, and we're going to talk about that in later videos, but right now we need to understand exactly what we're doing as far as like wiring. So coming in, we have a registration input status, right? We have input status 1, input status 2. Remember we talked about the 2 different input statuses, right? So we talked about the 2 different wiring capabilities. This being, say for instance, you wanted to wire up a registration 1, it would be on pin 14. You want to wire up a registration 2, it would be on pin 17, right? And keep in mind, you can actually use an external power source. I have done this in the past, but in this use case right here, what we're doing is we're utilizing the 24 volts from the actual K6K. So what I'll do is I'll actually push the button real quick and you'll see it. See that transition from a 1 to a 0? So what I'll do is I'll actually put the button inside of the actual video. And you can easily see when I do that. So I did this as a simple illustration to show you a simple wiring up. All I'm doing is normally open contact. When I push the button, it gives the input to the actual servo. Now if I wanted to see that, I could come into one of my programs. It doesn't matter, anywhere I want to actually populate this. Let's just open this up right quick and throw in a simple rung, and we'll throw in this. That way you can actually see this actually working, because a lot of people can't, you know, you see a input coming in live like that. It's really simple to see, right? So but if I used the second one, because we talked about both of them, right? I don't have the second one populated, so I'm just going to change this to input status 2. And if you see that, I'm only getting one coming in, right? So this is the way you would actually interpret and how that would work. Now, so if you wanted to utilize this in the program, again, you can alias this, you can do whatever you want to with it. But we're going to come back and do some program videos after this. But in this instance, we want to understand how things are wired, right? So when we understand how things are wired, we can better utilize them, better make sure things are done properly, right? So let's just say you had an input problem with registration or something like that. You could hook an oscilloscope up and find out if your power was clean or dirty by merely, you know, coming in here, looking at registration, the input registration, and then putting it on the common and seeing, okay, well, is the registration actually spiking up and down? The transition, I will say this, the transition from a 1 to a 0 on a registration input is the 21.5 volts. So it transitions from a 1 or from a 0 to a 1 at when the voltage comes into the actual input above 21.5 volts. It will transition from a 1 to a 0 if it drops below 21.5 volts. Okay, this is all DC. So I wanted to highlight that because you know, that's not really a known thing. That's not really something that people talk about too much. Now, again, these videos are very helpful for somebody that's very specific and they want to see this actual implementation. They want to understand this a lot better. Now, for those of you that just watching videos on YouTube, watching videos or whatever, this may not be helpful. But again, I'm making this to show the foundational elements that you need to actually be successful. And again, you can actually see all this working really simple, really easy, and you can see the registration input working. When I push the button, it works, and it's so simple to wire up. And I just wanted to show you the way it was, you know, the diagram of the way it looks, right? The actual input connector. The input connector looks completely different from the actual encoder connector. There's two different distinct pinouts of this, right? So if you were to look at the pinout, the input connector right here looks much different than the pinout on the actual the feedback, right? So the motor feedback is only 15 pin, when if you think about the other one, largely it's a lot greater. It's 26 pin, right? So it's a lot bigger, and it's a lot, you know, so just to understand the difference between the two, right? So hopefully this was helpful, and again, you know, I just made this video to actually see, you know, make sure you guys were well aware of a foundational element of the things you can do, the understanding of the inputs, the understanding of the way things were functioning. So please, you know, the foundation is something you need to know when you're wiring something up. So it's best to know, hey, if I'm using registration 1, I need to come in here and do this. If I'm using a home input, you know, it depends on my situation. Again, we talked about a proc switch. We talked about a actual limit switch. You know, the difference between the two and how you would use those. So make sure you understand your device that you're using that can best implement for your actual success. Okay, so with all that said, See you guys on the next one.